This is Cryptid Hunter. It's a top-down survival horror game with a Game Boy-inspired art style about hunting folklore creatures such as Bigfoot or the Chupacabra. And in today's episode, I'll be adding new weapons and new items to the game. But before we can get into the new content, gotta do a little housekeeping first. I did a playtest, and there was a lot of feedback. Not all of it was great, although I am still generally pretty happy with what went on. So, some of the additions I've made because of the playtests are the difficulty of the enemies has been greatly lowered. I made it way too hard for that playtest. And then I also fixed up controller support a little bit. One of the bigger additions now is the dash has been made much shorter, but it offers invincibility frames like the Dark Souls roll, so it's a lot more useful in combat instead of being used as just spamming for exploration, which didn't feel good. I added a level select screen. Right now, I just have 2 levels. Level 0 is the debug level I use to test all the items and stuff, and then level 1 is the basic level that's been used for all the playtesting so far. And then finally, the funniest is that I accidentally made the player left-handed. And I just didn't realize because I misnamed the right arm and the left arm, and I just went this entire time not realizing the player was a lefty. I added a setting into the menu after I fixed this so you can re-enable lefty mode if you so please. Yeah, and that's about it for the updates besides just other basic bug fixes. Alright, and now we can get into the new content. For the weapons, I think it's first important to go over how the weapon inventory now works. I added this object called the weapon crate, which is just how you equip any items that you've gained. The system currently works is that you have 4 types of weapons. You have melee, pistol, shotgun, and rifle, and you can hold one of these in your inventory at any given time, or one of each category. So you can have a knife, a pistol, etc., etc. Yeah, and then with the weapon crate, you can just swap out which of those you have equipped. And then how, gaining weapons is going to work is that I'm going to use the Doom 2016 system, where weapons are a, pickup that you can find on the map. And you can miss them on a level-to-level basis, but they will appear in multiple levels. So if you miss one in one level, you just don't have it for, a little bit, and then you can find it later on, so you don't, permanently miss any content. For the weapons currently in the game, we have the knife, revolver, and sawed-off shotgun, which are basically just, the default variants of the, melee, pistol, and shotgun weapon types. I go into more detail in the last video if you want to check that out, but it's not really that important. As for the new weapons, first up we have, for melee, the axe, which is just a, slower but more powerful variant of the knife, and then the baseball bat, which is way more unique. This deals not really that much damage. It's pretty weak, all things considered, but what makes it unique is that it deals a lot of knockback, making it a good, get off me tool, and it's genuinely really fun to use against the melee enemies. For the new pistols, the first new variant is the silenced pistol, which is a much faster firing, but albeit weaker, pistol, which is a little more, good for DPS, but not by much, and its ammo cost is a lot higher. This also has the lowest, noise radius of really any weapon that isn't a melee. This is a system that I haven't really explained in depth that much, but basically anytime you do a certain action like dashing or firing a weapon, there will be a little radius, and any enemy within that radius will hear it and then aggro. The silenced pistol has a very low, noise radius, because it's, silenced, making it a good, stealth option, but not super ammo efficient. And then next up for the pistols, we also have the SMG, which is an automatic and very fast-firing pistol, which is, again, it's the highest DPS of the pistols, but because its ammo cost is so high, you might not want to use it over something like the revolver or silenced pistol. For the new shotguns, we have the hunting shotgun. This is similar to the sawed-off, but it has more rounds and has a much tighter spread and slightly longer range, but at the cost of having lower damage. So this is a lot more consistent and good at longer ranges, but at close range you're probably going to want the sawed-off shotgun. So this is just a more reliable, but it's got lower peaks. And then next up we also have the tactical shotgun. This is the fastest firing shotgun of the bunch, and it doesn't round reload. It has a magazine, unlike the other shotguns, making it good, again, similarly to the SMG, where it's got the highest DPS output of the shotguns, but it has the highest ammo cost as well, introducing, again, that risk-reward element. And then finally, we also have a new weapon type, the rifles. First up, we have the Huntsman rifle. This is like a semi-automatic kind of medium fire rate rifle, which is the standard. This is not really the most interesting of the rifles here. This is really just like the baseline. Next up, we have the sniper rifle, which is probably the most unique weapon I added of the bunch here. This is a lot slower firing and has a very slow like projectile speed, but it also has extremely high damage. And on top of that, it can bounce off walls, which is totally not inspired by Halo in any way. Why would you ever say that? That mechanic isn't like super useful on its own, but I do think it is just like a cool way to add like a little more variety to the weapon sandbox here. And it can be fun sometimes to line up headshots with it. And then the final rifle variant is the assault rifle. This is basically the SMG of rifles, where it fires automatically and has the highest DPS at the cost of having the highest ammo consumption. This is again just like the basic variant in order to add like these, you know, tiers to all the weapons within the sandbox. And that is all the new weapons that got added. But I didn't just add weapons. I also added like 12 new items, and they get way crazier than the weapons did. To start off, we have the med kit, which is just a stronger version of the bandage. Not the most interesting thing, but it is just nice to have in the item pool. Next, we have the animal totem, which does not have an actual function, but it has a very high sell price, making it a like good reward item. On top of this, enemies also have a 1 in 100 chance of dropping it on death, meaning it does add like a random chance to just add like a bit of flair. And I do think that this will also make death a little more stressful, because since it's a random drop, you're not guaranteed to get it back if you die while holding it. So it does add a little more stress of like trying to get to the next checkpoint when you get one to drop, which I think is interesting. Then we have the beast totem, which is very similar to the animal totem in that it is a high sell price item that serves no other function. However, instead of being a random enemy drop or reward, it is dropped by any boss in the game, giving just a little more reward for beating the strongest enemies in the game. Not the most interesting item here, but it is definitely necessary for the game loop. And for the last totem, we have the offering totem, which, unlike the other totems, cannot be sold and it cannot be dropped, because this is closer to a key item in which you can place them at offering altars, and then that will activate some kind of door usually, or any other object. So this is essentially just a key, but it continues the totem tradition of being items that have no actual function, but have an inherent value, which is where their ability to help you comes in. Now, as for the more functional items, we have the lantern, which you place down at your feet, and it will create a bunch of light around you. This is great for just lighting up maybe like a boss arena or combat like arena, in order to actually be able to see what you're doing without relying on the flashlight. It's not the craziest thing. It also will like dim with time, so you can see how much time is left, and then it will disappear after the timer runs out. Again, this is just like good for getting a lot of visibility, but it's not the craziest thing, and probably will get buffed later because I don't think the balancing is all there. Next up, we have the sleeping bag, which is a consumable item that when used will create a checkpoint wherever you're standing. Currently in the game, before this, there were the campfires, which are like manually placed in the level by me, but the sleeping bag is different in that the player can choose where they want to save the checkpoint. So if there's any area where you like find the checkpoints frustrating, you can use this, and then that will sort of save that, which I think could lend itself to some pretty interesting like choice making on the player's end of like, do you wait until you find the next checkpoint, or if you maybe get an animal totem, you might want to just create the checkpoint right then and there. For the more offensive items, we have the throwing knife, which is similar to a weapon, except you use the like inventory to store like the quote-unquote ammo for it, which is just the individual items themselves. So the throwing knife, it has a like slightly high projectile speed and deals a good amount of damage, and it can bounce off walls like the sniper rifle. Does this make sense? Probably not. The sharp knife bouncing off the wall isn't really how that works, but I want to do some cool bullseye shit, so it's going to stay in the game with bouncy knives. Next up, we also have the flare, which is similar to the lantern, except you can throw it, making it a lot better for exploration rather than, like placing it at a single point for like a combat situation. Not super strong, and I think, again, similarly to the lantern, it might need a buff, but I will be tweaking a lot of the darkness mechanics next episode, so I don't want to fully touch those quite yet until I get that more in place. Next up, we have the dynamite item, which is, it does not actually hit enemies like the throwing knife did, but it will explode after a certain amount of time. So it's like a really good crowd control item, whereas like the throwing knife is a lot better for like taking out a single target. And I think that's pretty interesting, especially since it also did lead to the creation of explosions, which can be dropped in any way, shape, or form. So like an enemy, I could place an explosion as a manual drop, which will create a kamikaze enemy, which I will be doing later in development when I do get to new enemies. I could also use the animal totem code to make enemies just randomly explode with like a 1 in a million chance. I wouldn't do that, right? I don't know. We'll see. Yeah, and then similar to the dynamite, we have the RPG, which is totally balanced. This will be a really rare item, which will just deal a ton of damage and explode on impact, which again, this is just fun. You're not going to see a lot of these because it's just broken, but it's really funny. And for the last of the explosives, we have the Molotov, which is, it's similar to the dynamite, except it does explode on impact, unlike, you know, the like timer-based system. And instead of creating a one-time explosion, it creates a lingering fire effect, making it good for area denial on enemies, but because it takes longer to deal the damage over time, it maybe isn't useful against like fast melee enemies. So there's a bit, you know, like there's situational uses for the different items here, especially like also taking into consideration their cost. Like there are some situations where if you want to do crowd control, the RPG, it can do that, but maybe it's too expensive, so you want to use maybe a dynamite instead. And I think there's like a lot of interesting mechanics to be done with that. And then for our final item, we have the bear trap, which you place down, and then whenever you or an enemy enter it, you will be locked in place for a duration before the, you know, bear trap expires. So it's great for freezing maybe an enemy that's, you know, pressing you, but you do have to be careful because if you run into your own bear trap, then you get stuck, and that's obviously not great. I can also place these in the level manually, so, you know, maybe instead of you placing down a bear trap, there's just a level where there's some, you know, naturally spawning bear traps that you don't want to get caught in. So I think that's another like useful addition for this item, which has me really excited about like future use cases. And I mean, yeah, that's about it for the new items. Ideally, this is going to be all that's in the game. I might add more items. I don't want to necessarily add new weapons, but if development comes to that, development comes to that. And that's all the development work I did. I also want to make it clear that nothing I added in this episode is even remotely balanced, and I will have to get that all situated as development continues, because currently, you know, just playtesting it in a debug level does not give you the full picture, especially with like the ammo economy being a big element of the balance. So I will need to see these like introduced more naturally into new levels before I make like full like balance passes on all of them, especially with you know, my updates that I'm going to do on the darkness elements to make, you know, the flare and lantern, their places in the sandbox are going to be completely like redone. So I want to make sure that, you know, I get that out of the way before I balance them. But if you want to playtest, I have a link in the description below, and I would love to hear any feedback you have, both, you know, in the linked form and also just in the comments below. What do you want to see me add? You know, what thoughts do you have on what the, you know, weapons and items I added here today? Are they good? Are they bad? What do you like? What do you don't like? I'd love to hear it all. And, you know, subscribe. Next episode, I will be doing a lot of graphics and audio enhancements to, like, solidify the vibe of the game a lot more. And that's going to be, like, the main thing, especially, like, also some quality of life changes. It's going to be, like, a very visual and audio pass, which is going to be maybe not as interesting as, like, the new content I added here, but I think it is going to really elevate the game to the next level. So subscribe, stay tuned for that, and, you know, that's about it for me. See ya.